At first glance, romance may seem less exciting than giant robots battling each other, clashes between sorcerers and curses, or fights between ninjas and gods. Animation offers such limitless possibilities for the imagination, so why restrict it to something as ordinary as everyday life? But in reality, the fact that romance is so much closer to our own lives is exactly what makes it truly fascinating. Romantic anime offer one of the clearest ways to see how the world and the industry have changed, and how audiences have changed along with them. Some of these shifts are obvious, like smartphones and social media replacing flip phones. Others are deeper and much harder to notice. I think romance anime have changed dramatically over the past 30 years. In this video, I want to explore exactly how, and what those changes might say about all of us. To make the comparison as clear as possible, I'll look at 3 popular series from 3 different decades. One from the late 1990s, one from the late 2000s, and one from the early 2020s. I'll examine each of them from 3 angles: their characters and central premise, the way their romantic relationships develop, and their overall tone and sense of humor. And we'll begin chronologically with Love, Hina. Ken Akamatsu's Love, Hina was one of the biggest manga hits of the late 1990s, and, after it was adapted into an anime series, one of the defining titles of the early 2000s. The manga sold more than 20 million copies, while DVD sales of the anime, back when DVDs were the main format for home video, surpassed 1 million. It was quickly translated into English, and its American edition became one of the first manga releases in the US to preserve the original Japanese right-to-left reading order, helping establish what would later become the industry standard. In Japan, the manga even received a special full-color edition. Both the anime and the manga won numerous awards, including the prestigious Kodansha Manga Award in 2001. The franchise also spawned 2 light novels, 8 video games, and 7 soundtrack albums. In other words, Love, Hina was a truly massive and enormously influential title in its time. So what is the manga about? The protagonist, Keitaro Urashima, is a hapless high school graduate who dreams of getting into the most prestigious university in Japan, the University of Tokyo. But he has already failed the entrance exams twice. After falling out with his parents, he leaves home and goes to stay with his grandmother, who runs an inn. Except that when Keitaro arrives, he discovers that Hinata Inn stopped being an inn long ago and has since been turned into an all-girls dormitory. Luckily, his grandmother still allows him to stay, but only on the condition that he becomes its resident manager, taking care of the cleaning, minor repairs, and other household chores. And so, Keitaro, a loser who has barely ever spoken to a girl before, suddenly finds himself surrounded by a colorful cast of heroines. For the most part, each of them embodies a familiar anime archetype. Naru is a classic tsundere, outwardly rude and fiercely independent, but ultimately the person who cares about Keitaro the most. Motoko is a kudere, a reserved female samurai who devotes herself entirely to kendo. The cunning Mitsune, who is older than Keitaro, enjoys teasing him about his lack of experience and is always happy to have a drink. And Kaola, a foreign exchange student, is simply a cheerful, carefree troublemaker. And at different points in the story, all of them develop some kind of romantic interest in Keitaro. For some, those feelings are deep and sincere. For others, they are mostly played for laughs, or are not entirely genuine. Either way, Love, Hina is a harem anime in the most literal sense of the term. But not all harem anime are the same. So, let's take a closer look at how romantic relationships develop here, or rather, how they fail to develop. At the center of the romantic storyline is a mystery. When Keitaro was a child, he fell for a girl, and the two of them promised each other that they would one day get into the University of Tokyo together. The problem is that he remembers almost nothing about her, not her name, not her age, not even any distinctive features of her appearance. This allows manga creator Ken Akamatsu to play with the reader by constantly introducing contradictory clues. At one point, it seems obvious that the girl was Naru. Then new details emerge that point to another heroine, Mutsumi. Then once again, it appears to have been Naru after all. And this continues for 14 volumes and more than 100 chapters. The mystery allows the story to reset the characters to their original positions after every arc that brings them closer together. It creates an almost sitcom-like structure in which the characters barely change and continue to perform the same familiar roles. Love Hina is built in such a way that the moment Keitaro finally finds his true love, the story inevitably has to end. So that moment is postponed until the very finale. And there is a reason I brought up sitcoms. If the romantic storyline remains static and the characters have little room to grow, what keeps the reader or viewer engaged? The answer is obvious. Comedy. Most of Love Hina's story arcs are built around it. But how well does that humor actually work? Judge for yourself. Most of the jokes in the series revolve around Keitaro's terrible luck, which constantly lands him in compromising situations. One moment, he slips on a banana peel and accidentally looks up one of the girl's skirts. The next, he falls through a broken ceiling and catches another girl changing. Or he simply walks through the wrong door and ends up in the women's shower. And all of this is accompanied, of course, by shameless amounts of fan service. So this is the picture we are left with: a highly contrived, completely unrealistic, and fairly generic harem anime, filled with familiar character types and crude jokes. Why was Love Hina so incredibly popular? The reason is that this was exactly what audiences at the time wanted and craved. The 1990s saw otaku culture flourish. Serious, often bleak works like Akira and Ghost in the Shell were increasingly joined by lighter, more cheerful stories. As the internet became more widespread and online fandoms began to emerge, a new kind of audience took shape. Fans who actively spent money on merchandise, collections, and figurines, played visual novels, and, most importantly for us, watched romantic comedies and harem anime. Love Hina arrived at exactly the right moment. It became one of the first manga series to be widely discussed on online forums, such as 2channel. The manga's creator, Ken Akamatsu, was himself part of this otaku culture. He drew erotic Final Fantasy VII doujinshi, amateur fan-made manga, dreamed of getting into the University of Tokyo after high school, though he never managed to do so, and was obsessed with idols and supermodels. As a result, his protagonist embodies many of the classic otaku fantasies, from dating a foreign girl to being surrounded by an entire harem that falls in love with him, despite the fact that he is a complete loser. Today, Love Hina can be genuinely difficult to watch or read. Its jokes have aged poorly, its characters can be irritating, and the complete lack of progress in its romantic relationships is more likely to feel frustrating than suspenseful. But that was the late 1990s and early 2000s. The same cannot be said of our next case study, Toradora. Toradora first appeared in 2006 as a light novel series written by Yuyuko Takamiya and illustrated by Yasu. Just a year later, it won the Kadokawa Light Novel Award for Best Romance. Then, in 2008, JC Staff released an anime adaptation, directed by Tatsuyuki Nagai and written by Mari Okada. Today, you may know this creative duo from their work on dramas such as When the Promised Flower Blooms and The Anthem of the Heart. Keep that in mind. We will return to it later. Just like Love Hina, Toradora was an enormous success. Its DVD volumes regularly appeared in the sales charts, the light novels had sold more than 3 million copies by 2009, and the franchise also received several spin-offs and a separate manga adaptation. At first glance, Toradora resembles Love Hina in more than just the scale of its success. It is also, in a sense, a harem anime. Its protagonist is Ryuji Takasu, a high school student whom everyone fears because of his intimidating face. He may not be as hopeless as Keitaro, but he does not have much experience with romance or relationships either. Ryuji has a crush on his cheerful classmate Minori. To win her over, he strikes a deal with Minori's friend Taiga, a cold and aggressive girl who is herself in love with Ryuji's best friend, Yusaku. Their plan is to help each other get together with the people they like. The whole arrangement becomes even more complicated when Yusaku's childhood friend, the model Ami, enters the picture. And while, just as in Love Hina, every major female character shows some degree of romantic interest in Ryuji at different points in the story, the relationships between them are far more complicated and tangled. If we were to represent them as a diagram, the relationships in Love Hina would look something like this, and in Toradora, they would look like this. The development of the relationships becomes more complex as well. In Love Hina, any progress between the characters was constantly reset. In Toradora, their actions have consequences and permanently change the dynamics between them. We watch Taiga and Ryuji gradually grow closer. We see Ami become the first person to understand how Minori truly feels about him, and then cruelly pressure her into confronting those feelings. And we watch Ami herself slowly fall for Ryuji. As the story progresses, the characters resemble familiar anime archetypes less and less. The endlessly cheerful Minori hides her emotional wounds behind a smile. The confident and glamorous Ami is, in reality, deeply frightened by her own popularity. And Taiga is profoundly affected by her troubled relationship with her parents. The characters in Toradora are given far greater depth and become less artificial. They are complex people with contradictory motives. What they say may conflict with what they do, while their actions may conflict with what they truly want or think. In this and other works by Mari Okada and Tatsuyuki Nagai, emotions are built around unresolved questions, fleeting hints, and the characters' internal conflicts.
ほんと子供だよな。生姜焼きがマストだぞ。生姜は体を温めるからな。じゃな。
子供か。
And that is precisely why drama, rather than comedy, moves to the foreground. In fact, the most common criticism directed at Toradora today is that it dramatizes every conflict. An argument between two girls turns into a fight with wooden swords in the middle of a classroom. A confession of love naturally requires a snowstorm. And rescuing Taiga, who cannot swim, from the school pool ends in shouting, tears, and a full emotional breakdown. Everything is pushed to an emotional extreme, as if first love in high school were the only thing in life that truly mattered. But this was precisely the style that would later resonate with audiences in the creator's more dramatic works. This shift in emphasis naturally changes the presentation and the humor as well. Toradora still contains plenty of jokes, but they are no longer so heavily dependent on fan service. Much of the comedy now comes from ordinary domestic details, such as Ryuji's love of cleaning, and humor is no longer the main attraction. Instead, it breaks up the dramatic tone and gives the audience a chance to breathe. What we end up with, then, is a tangled and highly dramatic harem story, with fewer jokes and far more tears. The characters are no longer quite so artificial, although their conflicts can still feel exaggerated and theatrical. It is a completely different kind of work from Love Hina. And these changes were also closely connected to the way audience tastes evolved in the late 2000s and early 2010s. By this point, the audience itself had grown older. Many of the same viewers who had watched Love Hina in high school or university had now experienced their own first relationships, started working, and moved away from home. Some of those viewers retreated even further into escapism, a trend that would later fuel the explosive popularity of isekai. Others began looking for more complex and realistic stories, where emotions were not formulaic, and the characters themselves were deeply imperfect. At the same time, mobile phone fiction was becoming increasingly popular in Japan, stories written to be read on old feature phones. These novels followed the same broader trend. Many focused on failed relationships and infidelity, while some dealt with even darker subjects, including sexual violence and murder. Their audience was no longer made up primarily of otaku. They were widely read by ordinary students, especially young women. One of the most popular examples was Deep Love, which was later adapted into several different manga series and even a feature-length film. In other words, audiences were no longer looking to romance primarily for fan service and dirty jokes. They wanted complicated relationships and emotionally intense drama. And in that sense, romantic titles from the late 2000s and early 2010s are much easier to watch today. Drama does not become dated quite as quickly, and Toradora still holds up remarkably well. But today, a very different kind of romance has taken center stage, one with a completely different approach. And as our example, we'll look at a recent premiere, the anime adaptation of Saka Mikami's manga The Fragrant Flower blooms with dignity. Like every other title we've discussed, it is also a major commercial success, as if I had deliberately chosen these examples that way. By September, the manga had more than 7 million copies in circulation, had received a nomination for the Next Manga Awards, and had already earned a swift anime adaptation from Cloverworks, one of the industry's leading studios when it comes to romance anime. The studio is also responsible for Horimiya, My Dress-Up Darling, and The Rascal Does Not Dream. And this is the first title in this essay that cannot really be described as a harem anime. The protagonist, Rintaro, looks like a dangerous delinquent. He is tall, with dyed hair and pierced ears, and he attends Chidori High, a school notorious for its troublemakers. But in reality, Rintaro is kind and considerate, and so are all of his friends. Reminds of Ryuji, right? He often helps his parents at the bakery they run. That is where he catches the attention of Kaoruko, a girl who attends Kikyo, the prestigious school next door. Despite the rivalry between their schools, Rintaro and Kaoruko become friends, and eventually bring their own circles into the relationship as well. As a premise, this is no more original than the titles we discussed earlier. It is a classic Romeo and Juliet setup. Two opposing schools and a romance between people from either side. What makes The Fragrant Flower blooms with dignity stand out is what happens once the romance actually begins. Rintaro and Kaoruko get together as early as chapter 39, and the story does not end there. By now, the manga has already passed 160 chapters. In Love Hina and Toradora, the entire story builds toward the beginning of a relationship. Mutual love becomes the final destination, with a kiss at sunset as the cherry on top. In The Fragrant Flower blooms with dignity, however, the confession and the first kisses are only one stage in the character's development. The story does not tease the reader with the question of whether the two of them will end up together. Nor does it introduce a conventional love triangle with, let's say, a childhood friend. More than that, Rintaro and Kaoruko's relationship becomes the driving force of the entire story. The fact that Kaoruko notices Rintaro's feelings and responds to them helps him open up not only to her, but to his friends at school as well. And when those friends begin treating the girls from Kikyo with warmth and respect, it helps the girls become kinder in turn, and let go of their own prejudices. The relationship at the center of the story creates a ripple effect, gradually changing everything around it. From the characters' career choices to their relationships with their families. At the same time, every major conflict and emotional turning point in The Fragrant Flower is resolved without excessive dramatization. The characters simply talk to one another and make a genuine effort to express what they feel. This works because even the supporting characters are given remarkable depth. The Fragrant Flower is one of those rare manga where tears can catch you off guard. Not necessarily during some grand dramatic climax, but on a completely ordinary page about the protagonist's parents or one of their friends, simply because that particular story happens to connect perfectly with your own experience. Comedy receives the least attention here. It is still present, but it is almost entirely situational, and is more often built around wordplay than physical slapstick. There is no conventional fan service either. Instead, Saka Mikami invites the reader to admire the characters' carefully designed everyday outfits and their large, intricately drawn eyes, reminiscent of classic shoujo manga. In one interview, manga creator Saka Mikami said that The Fragrant Flower blooms with dignity grew out of a simple idea: to tell a story in which every character was genuinely kind. And this is exactly the ideal that romance manga seems to be moving toward today. The Fragrant Flower is not alone. Series such as Horimiya, My Dress-Up Darling, Skip and Loafer, and Blue Box are shifting the focus once again. the 1990s and early 2000s belonged to otaku fantasy. The 2010s were defined by heightened drama. Today, romance is trying to leave these conventions behind and become more grounded, not to portray an otaku's idealized dream, or emotional suffering pushed to theatrical extremes, but feelings and relationships that might actually exist in real life. Creators can no longer focus exclusively on the domestic Japanese market or on hardcore anime fans. They have to think more broadly and appeal to mainstream audiences around the world, and those audiences expect something very different. Panty shots and jokes about naked girls now attract criticism. Stories that endlessly toy with the audience's expectations become frustrating and turn into material for memes on social media. To win over modern viewers, romance needs to offer something else. In a world that feels increasingly frightening, where new wars begin every day and technology seems to be slipping beyond our control, people long for warmth and peace of mind. Romance manga responds to these changing needs faster than almost any other genre, and today it offers exactly those feelings. Before we finish, I should point out that all the examples I chose belong to shonen romance. Romantic stories aimed primarily at young men and published in some of Japan's most popular magazines. I deliberately left shoujo manga out of this essay because it follows somewhat different conventions and trends. But I would be very interested to hear your thoughts on it in the comments. I also want to anticipate comments along the lines of, but the quintessential quintuplets came out in 2019, and that is a classic harem series much closer to Love Hina. Why did you leave it out? Throughout this essay, I deliberately emphasized the popularity of the titles I discussed. My point is not that every romance series suddenly changes at the snap of a finger. Of course it does not. This is a long, uneven process, but by looking at which new titles become especially popular, we can see the direction in which that process is moving. And finally, I promise to explain what these changes in romance manga might say about us. To be honest, I really like the direction romance is taking today. I see it as a sign that the audience is growing up. I see it moving away from the idea of women as a final reward, waiting for the protagonist at the end of the story. Instead, it places much greater value on how relationships are portrayed, how the characters support each other, how much care and warmth they show one another, and how openly they talk about their emotions and feelings. I think this is exactly what we are so often missing in the real world, and what we may be unconsciously searching for. Today we are not looking for the fulfillment of crude fantasies, or for a dramatic, eternal love that has to be fought for at every turn. We are looking for something simple, sincere, and real. And I hope that seeing these kinds of relationships appear in manga is only the first sign that we may, eventually, learn how to build them in real life as well.